We're on Gimel and Beis, and we are, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 8 lines from the top of the page, right in the middle. The following question was presented to them. So it's a discussion, obviously, in some base medrash. And I think I mentioned this here before, from the way, the wording and the way in which the Gemoro introduces a question, you can determine the type of question. And the way the Gemoro introduces this question is with the root word boye. So it can come out in different ways. It's iboye, iboye lahu, boy minei, the same root word. And the best way to translate that word is an inquiry. That is to say, the people asking the question don't have an agenda. They just want to know. There are other times when the person asking a question is making a point. You'll see that with the word maskif, or sometimes even meisvei, different types of questions, where the person making the question
those are it's like a setup, those ones.
Yeah, so exactly, it's a challenge, challenging you based on a logic or challenging you based on a source, different types of questions. But iboilahu is an inquiry. So whenever you see this word as an introduction, the beis ayin yud, that's the root word, boye, boy minei, ba minei, whatever the terminology is, it's an inquiry. So iboilahu, the following question was presented to them. So it's a discussion in the Beis Medrash, obviously. Hein v'sidon, they and their plaster, the layer of cement, layer of plaster. Oidilmo, or perhaps hein b'loy sidon, them without their plaster. So what's this referring to? Let's see Rashi. Hein v'sidon or hein b'loy sidon. Hani shiur de masnisan. These measures that the Mishnah gives in saying how wide the walls have to be, and that each person has to give a certain amount of tfachim to make up for the width of the wall, the neighbors. Im oive hatiach, does that include the thickness of the plaster? Kachashiv lehen is being counted within them. Oidilma, or perhaps makam avonim have bepoitia levad tiach asid, or the space of the stone themselves are the full thickness without the space required for the plaster. So it's the question. We want to know what it means. So Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says, Mistaber would make sense. Hein v'sidon, that the Mishnah means the space that takes up for them, the stone, plus the plaster. Why? Very simple reasoning. Because if you're going to suggest Hein b'loy sidon, that the Mishnah is giving the measure of the stone, excluding the plaster, lisni l'shiura, then the Mishnah should give the amount of space you're required to give for plaster. If the Mishnah is so precise in telling you each neighbor exactly how much you have to give, and the measure of the stone is excluding the plaster, then the Mishnah should say right afterwards, and how much you have to give for the plaster. Meaning the Mishnah is getting so precise down to the tefach of how much space you have to give. So then why wouldn't you include the plaster if you're being so precise? Essentially, that's the Gemara's essential, that's Rav Nachman's essential argument. And therefore, says the Gemara, therefore we can derive from here, hein v'sidon, that the Mishnah means to say the width of the stone plus the plaster, because the Mishnah tells us exactly how much each person has to give. And therefore, if I had to give more for plaster, the Mishnah would say so. Gemara says, loy, perhaps no. La'olam literally means like forever, but it means like really, or in some way, la'olam, I could have said, hey malach, I could tell you, hein b'lei sidon. Now when the Mishnah gives these measures, it means the measures of the stone without the plaster. Now, why did the Mishnah leave out the measure for the plaster? Right, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak's argument is that if the Mishnah is giving you precise measure, it's giving you the total measure. And now we're suggesting that maybe it means the stone without the plaster. So why not say how much space you need to give for plaster? Says the Gemara, because the plaster does not equal a full tefach, like Tanya doesn't say it. In other words, the Mishnah is only there, the Mishnah gives you precise measures, but only in increments of tefach. Anything less than a tefach is too small incrementally for the Mishnah to list as something you have to give, contribute. So it just says at the tefach level. But it's possible that in addition to the tefachim you're required to give for the stone, you have to give a little bit of it extra, maybe a half an inch, whatever it is, for the plaster. And that the Mishnah doesn't want to list because it's too small, it's negligible. So under a tefach, the Mishnah won't list. Note, the Gemara challenges this with the pretty obvious question, which is, Bakatani, but we learned the livnin, with respect to the livnin type wall. This guy gives a tefach and a half, and the other guy gives a tefach and a half. So we see the Mishnah does list measures that are smaller than a tefach. So why would you suggest that the reason, this is what the Gemara suggested, that maybe the Mishnah is excluding the space for plaster. And the reason why the Mishnah excludes it is because it's less than a tefach. But we see the Mishnah does include measures that are less than a tefach. Because the Mishnah says, this guy's got to give a tefach and a half, and this guy's got to give a tefach and a half. Says the Gemara, no. Hasam, there, with respect to the half a tefach that each person's giving, chazi litzdarufi, the two half tefach can come together as a full tefach. And therefore the Mishnah does include it in the description. But the plaster is less than even a half a tefach, so it's less than even combining to a full tefach, and therefore it's too negligible, and even that the Mishnah won't list. At this point, the Gemara is uncertain, unclear as to whether or not the measures mentioned in the Mishnah are to be less than a tefach. I'm sorry, does the measures include the amount of space required for the plaster, or does the space exclude the amount for a plaster? The argument to say that it includes the amount for plaster is that the Mishnah doesn't list anything else. The Mishnah gives a final measure, and the final measure seems to include everything. That's Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak's argument. The counter argument is that the Mishnah is speaking of the size of the stone. As far as the plaster, it's negligible, and the Mishnah doesn't list it. This is the argument either way. So that's the point we are at the Gemara right now. So let's look at Rashi. If you notice, just stop if you noticed, when the Gemara quoted the Mishnah to prove that the Mishnah does list things that are less than half a tefach, they use the example of livnin, which is a tefach and a half each. Rashi uses the example earlier of the gvil, or the gazes, which is 2.5 tefachim each. So it's a different version of the Gemara, but the point is the same. I have in my Gemara a little note to the side which says that there's different versions. Okay. So says the Gemara, the Mishnah indeed included lists, measures that are less than a tefach, because the Mishnah said that each person has to give 2.5 tefachim for the gvil wall. Alma, the implication is, says Rashi, that the Mishnah does include measures that are even a half a tefach. And if that's the case, why not also include the measure of the plaster, even though it's less than a tefach? Answered the Gemara that the reason why the Mishnah listed half tefach is because the two half tefach chazi litzdarufi can be combined. Shalzeh is shalzeh. The half tefach of this guy and the half tefach of that guy, mitzvah from the tefach, come together to make a full tefach, and therefore the Gemara, the Mishnah is okay to list it, but the plaster is too negligible because it's even less than a half a tefach, and it's even less than combined together becoming a full tefach. So we're still in the point where the Gemara is unsure whether the measures include the plaster or don't include the plaster. So back to the Gemara. The Gemara says, Toshma, come in here. The Gemara introduces another text which might support one way of reading it or the other. This Mishnah is with respect to Erevin, as Rashi says, with respect to making a mavoi. You see the Rashi there on the side. HaKodesh Amru, the beam of which we said. Says Rashi, Le'inyan Hechsher Mavoi. It's talking about how to make a mavoi kosher. A mavoi is a certain type of certain type of courtyard. It's an alleyway in which there's a bunch of chatzeres that are opened up to it. And in order for it to be turned into a shusay yachid, so that you can carry, you have to have a koida. You have to have a beam, a cross beam going at the entrance to this mavoi. And that cross beam serves as a reminder to tell people inside not to pass this line, because after this line, it's a shusay rabbim. And that, along with other things that have to be done, allow you to carry within that mavoi. But the point here is, the Mishnah says like this, HaKodesh Amru, the size of the beam of which we said you can make the mavoi kosher Rechava has to be wide enough. It has to be wide enough that it should be able to hold upon it a ariach. We had this word ariach in the previous Gemara. An ariach is a kind of stone. Or brick. Variach and a ariach is what size? Chatzi levena shagimot tvachim. It's a half a levena of 3 tvachim. So the levena brick is 3 tvachim, right? We had this in the Gemara earlier. The levena is a full-size brick that's 3 tvachim wide. And the ariach is a half brick. So how wide or how big does this beam have to be? It has to be big enough to be able to handle an ariach, a half a brick. Okay. So what does this prove? What does this prove? This mission about ariach and levena. So it says Rashi, Gimel Tvachim. Alma, the implication is, Gimel Tvachim the Katani, the three Tvachim described for the size of the brick, the levena brick, Legabe Mas Nisan, as far as our Mishnah is concerned, Gabe Livnin, with respect to the Livnin wall mentioned in the Mishnah, the wall made of this Livnin brick, is then there's in tefach u'mechza. This guy's got to give a tefach and a half. There's then there's in tefach u'mechza, and this guy's got to give a brick and a half. So the livnin in our Mishnah is consistent with the livnin in the Mishnah of Mavoi. 3 tvachim for us, tefach and a half each guy. 3 tvachim over there, where it says explicitly, levena shal gimel tvachim, a levena of 3 tvachim. Hein b'loy sidam ka'amar. It must be the brick without plaster. Why? Because when the Mishnah says that you're going to balance a brick on the top of a beam, it's not talking about plastered bricks. It's just talking about a brick. Right? The Mishnah there says, yeah, the beam has to be able to handle a half a levena, and the levena is 3 tvachim. Obviously, you're taking a singular brick and you're putting it on top somewhere. It's not with plaster. So the levena lochadei shlosh tvachim, because the levena brick itself is fully 3 tvachim, as described in the Mishnah by Mavoi. And therefore, in the Mishnah, when our Mishnah says 3 tvachim for a levena, must be without the plaster. That's the raya from the Mishnah in Erevin. Yeah, hope it's clear. If it's not, interrupt me, please. Says the Gemara.
Rabbi Levi.
Yeah.
I want to ask you, the Gemara you have is Bava Basra, right?
Yeah, we're looking at Basra now. Yeah.
Yeah, because I'm going back and forth on the screen. That's why. I just wanted to get a Gemara, so it's Bava Basra.
Yeah, it's Bava Basra. Yeah. Give me my base. So, says the Gemara. Actually, Hassam there, when the Mishnah there in Erevin says that a levena is 3 tvachim wide, is beravrisa. Ravravsa, I'm not sure I pronounced the word, is a bigger brick. It's bigger than usual. It's bigger than usual. So usually a levena brick is a little less than 3 tvachim, and the plaster would make up the difference to 3 tvachim, whereas the brick described in Erevin is a little bit bigger. Says the Gemara. It's like, let's see Rashi. Hasam Ravsa. Over there, it's a bigger brick. Umasnisan in our Mishnah, which says that each person's got to give a tefach and a half, and that includes the space of the plaster. Bezutrisa is a smaller brick. The imsidon lehava elegim tvachim. That even with the plaster, it's no more than 3 tvachim. Okay, says the Gemara. Why would I assume that? Why would I assume that over there is talking about a bigger brick? Where's the implication? Says the Gemara Dekanami. The precise language of the Mishnah there indicates that it's actually a bigger brick. Why? Because when the Mishnah there describes Ariyach, which is the half brick, it says, quote, Ariyach, and what's in Ariyach? Ariyach is chatzi levena shal gimel tvachim. It's a half a levena of gimel tvachim. Tekatoni shal shlosh tvachim, of 3 tvachim. Why say that? Just say an Ariyach is half a levena. Why say an Ariyach is a half a levena of 3 tvachim? If the universal standard of levena is 3 tvachim, then just say an Ariyach is a half a levena. Why say the Ariyach is a half a levena of a 3 tvachim? Because there must be some other sized levena. So it must be this other sized levena that's smaller than 3 tvachim, and therefore the Mishnah in Erevin wants to tell you that when you measure this Ariyach and it's a half a levena, it's a half of the bigger levena, which is 3 tvachim. Otherwise, if there's a universal standard that's all the same size, it would just say a riach is half a levena, without saying a levena of 3 tvachim. The fact that it says levena of 3 tvachim implies that there are the Ika Zutra, that there are smaller ones. And the Mishnah is telling you that you should be a half of the bigger one. Shema Mina, this is indeed a good raya. So the conclusion therefore remains that our Mishnah, when it says the measure of Tvachim, like Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak suggested to begin with, it includes the space of the plaster. And the raya is from the Gemara, from the Mishnah elsewhere in Eruvin, which says that an ariach is with respect to the law of how thick the beam of the Eruvin has to be, that it has to be big enough to be able to hold an ariach. And ariach is a half a levena of 3 tvachim. And the fact that the Mishnah there finds it necessary to describe the levena as a levena of 3 tvachim means there are other kinds of levenas. And therefore you fall back to the default position of Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, which is that the Mishnah says 3 tvachim must include the plaster too. Okay. Now let's see Tosafos. The Gemara just said that by virtue of the fact that the Mishnah in Eruvin says that the ariach is a half a levena of 3 tvachim, is a raya that there are other sized levenas. Otherwise, why would you have to describe it as a levena of 3 tvachim? But the Mishnah implied the Ika Zutrase, that there are smaller ones. That's what the Gemara implied. And therefore, our Mishnah is a smaller levena than the levena of Eruvin. The levena of Eruvin is 3 tvachim alone. And our levena is 3 tvachim only once it has the plaster. So ask Tosafos a pashta kasha. Lest you suggest the Dilma perhaps michlal the ikar avrisa. Maybe there are bigger ones. Maybe the levena of 3 tvachim is not describing a bigger size brick. Maybe it's describing a smaller size brick. Maybe it's the exclusion of bigger bricks. And therefore our Mishnah at the smallest size is 3 tvachim brick, and then the plaster needs extra room. Because when the Mishnah there says that you have to measure by a levena of 3 tvachim, it means the minimum size, but there are actually bigger ones. My diko is that, and what kind of diuk is this? Yeah, simple question. Again, if I'm not clear, interrupt me. The Kiddutzri, and the Re answers. The im pachas mishleisha. Let's assume that there are no levena, there are no bricks that are smaller than 3 tvachim. Ela gedolos yesh, but there are bigger ones. And the Mishnah in Eruvin is telling you to measure the ariach against the smallest size levena. And that's why it says levena shal gimel. Imkain, if so, bichdi nokat chatzi levena shal gimel tvachim. It was useless. Bichdi means it was for no reason to say that you have to measure against the levena of 3 tvachim. Why? It only had to say ella, nothing other than variach chatzi levena. The ariach is a half a levena. The su loya, no more. You wouldn't have to say a levena of 3. Why? Because whenever you say an unqualified number, I would automatically go to the lowest measure. However, the Mefaresh Shiur, because you didn't give a measure. Because you didn't give an amount, let's say the Mishnah in Eruvin would read that the ariach is a half a levena. And then I would do an investigation, and I'd find out that there's 5 size different levenas. What would I assume? I would assume to go to the lowest common denominator, because you didn't specify. So I can't make you be more machmir without first explicitly stating so. So I would anyways go to the smallest size. So therefore, if 3 tvachim was a smaller size brick, the Mishnah wouldn't have to say a levena of 3 tvachim. It would just say a levena period, and I would figure out that it's talking about the lowest measure. From the fact that the Mishnah there in Eruvin says a levena of 3 tvachim means don't go to the lowest measure, because there are levenas that are smaller than 3 tvachim. And I'm telling you to go to the levena that's 3 tvachim. But our Mishnah, which just says levena 3 tvachim without qualifying, we could go to the lowest size levena, and the lowest size levena is 3 tvachim after plaster. This is Tosafos. Just to give this a little bit more beef, go to the picture I sent you, the first picture, the one I showed, like the one I responded to from a couple days ago. It's from the Bשיטמ, and the picture says in the brackets on the top Rashba, and then under it says Tosafos. So it's just going to give a little bit more words to Tosafos for why it is, we would by default go to the lowest common denominator. Right? Tosafos is asserting that if 3 tvachim is a smaller size levena, the Mishnah and Erevin wouldn't have to say a levena of 3 tvachim. Just say a levena, and I would automatically go to the lowest bar. So Tosafos didn't really explain why. I just kind of told you that you go to the lowest bar, because why be more machmer if you're not explicitly stating to be machmer? But let's see how which I kind of actually picked up from here, and let's see. So Rashba, Michlal de Ikar Zutusi, the Gemara said that from the fact that the Mishnah in Erevin says a levena of 3 tvachim and has to specify the size of the levena means that there are smaller sizes, and the Mishnah is telling you don't measure the ariyach against the smallest levena, but measure against the levena of 3 tvachim. That's what the Gemara said, and asked the Rashba the same question of Tosafos. Unless you ask, name a machlal de ikar rapsi, maybe there are bigger ones, and the Mishnah in Erevin is telling you not that you should go to the bigger size rather than the smaller size, but rather the Mishnah is telling you go to the smallest levena, which is 3 tvachim, even though there might be bigger ones. Yesh leimar, says Rashba. First, the Rashba gives actually a much more balabatish answer, much more like a straightforward answer than the pilpul that Tosafos just gave us. Says the Rashba, Einochanami, you're right. There's bigger ones and smaller ones. Miyu nonetheless, because you can go both directions. You can say it's either bigger ones or smaller ones. We go to the kula in favor of the one who's being claimed against. In other words, you're trying to make me donate more of my land for this wall. So maybe you can read it that there are bigger ones, maybe you can read there are smaller ones, but you can't prove it either way, and therefore you got no choice but to go to the lower one. So maybe Taka the Mishnah there means 3 tvachim and not bigger ones. And maybe our Mishnah could mean bigger ones. Maybe, but go prove it. And because it can go either direction, therefore you can't make a claim bigger than the lowest denominator. So here's the first reason why we would go l'kula rather than l'chumra. Because I'm asking you, this is what I think he's talking about. I don't think he's talking about nitva and Erevin. There's no nitva, unless, no, because there's no kula and chumra in Erevin. Because in Erevin it's explicit, it's 1.5 tvachim, 1.5 tefach. It's a question of over here, what do we mean over here? So the Rashba seems to be saying that the reason why we're going l'kula is because it seems like the principle is whenever you're trying to extrapolate money from somebody else, the burden of proof is on you to take the money out of me. So if you're going to make me donate more of my ground toward this wall, go prove that I need to. And therefore, we're going to go to the l'kula, we're going to go to the lowest bar. That's the Rashba. Now let's give other reasons why you go l'kula and say that our brick is smaller than 3 tvachim and it only reaches 3 tvachim with the plaster. So it says Tosafos Harash, about Tosafos Tirtzu. The Tosafos answered the same question that the Rashba asked. So this is all a quote from Tosafos. The end of the quote, the end is there. Right? That's what our Tosafos said. But because the Mishnah in Erevin does not give an explicit, had the Mishnah in Erevin not said an amount, had it said an ariyach, if 3 tvachim is the smallest size brick, if 3 tvachim is the smallest size brick, then the Mishnah in Erevin would not have to explicitly state a levena of 3 tvachim. It could have just said levena, and I would automatically say to go to the smallest size levena. Right? Why would I do that? And therefore, because the Mishnah in Erevin does say it's a levena of 3 tvachim, the implication is that there actually are smaller ones, and the Mishnah in Erevin is telling you, don't go to the smallest one, go to the one that's 3 tvachim. That's the Gemara's answer. So now the question becomes, why would you assume if the Mishnah in Erevin does not give a number and just says ariyach is a half a levena, why would I assume to go to the smallest size levena? So says the Shiur giving 2 reasons for that to explain Tosafos. So the Shiur is quoting Tosafos Harash. Reason number 1, mishum davar ha'mesuyamu, because it's a matter of specific matter. The davar which a davar assume it's a specific item. Meaning to say like this. There's in halacha. I think this is what he's referring to. In halacha, there's a gather of a davar she'einu mesoyim, which means an unqualified item. So if I, let's say, told you, there are many conditions to this halacha, but let's just say I told you that I'm selling you my field with the exception of a certain amount. And I use those words, a certain amount. Now, I didn't specify anything. So what's a certain amount? A certain amount could be 90% of it, or it could be 10% of it, or it could be 2% of it. So it's an unqualified statement. It's a davar she'einu mesoyim. And when there's a davar she'einu mesoyim, we cancel out what you said, and the kinyan doesn't hold because you haven't qualified what you're saying. But a davar mesuyim, when you talk about a specific item, as the Mishnah here is doing, a specific item, here is the brick. So then you go and you see what's the smallest way in which we can identify that thing you just said. So that's basically what the Gemara, what it seems to me what the Shiur is saying. So davar mesuyim, you identified and labeled a specific item. So go find out what's the item. And I can't make you do any more than the smallest specific of that measure. Reason number one, to go l'kula. Reason number two, v'oid, the tikkun mavoi, the idea of fixing up a mavoi is only the rabbanon. The whole idea of an erev is the rabbanon. D'oraisa, you're allowed to carry in anything that isn't a biblical Rosh Hashanah. A biblical Rosh Hashanah is a place, lots of conditions to make a biblical Rosh Hashanah, d'oraisa, but the basic ones is if it's a certain width, a certain amount of traffic, or if it's a highway that goes between city and city, but an alleyway that opens up to a bunch of courtyards, it does not qualify as a d'oraisa Rosh Hashanah. And if I'm not mistaken, Shlema HaMelech, who instituted Erevin, that you cannot carry in these places, even though it's not a Rosh Hashanah, because it's a shared space, it's too similar to a Rosh Hashanah, and if you have to have an Erev. All to say, the tikkun mavoi the rabbanon, who the mavoi is a rabbanon, and therefore we go l'kula, and therefore we would go l'kula. We'd go to the smallest size brick. Had the Mishnah even said that in the riyach is a half a levena without specifying what size the levena is, I would have automatically gone to the smallest size brick because it's a rabbanon, and rabbanon we go l'kula. Avokiva the ikaz, what to say? But because in reality there are some bricks that are smaller than 3 tvachim, which is the bricks in our Mishnah that are smaller than 3 tvachim. Right, because our Mishnah it's only 3 tvachim with the plaster. Therefore, nicha, it's correct. Therefore, it's correct that the Gemara and Erevin had to specify that we're talking about a 3 tvachim levena, which is a bit bigger than the smallest one. Because otherwise, we would have fallen to the smallest one by default because it's the rabbanon, or because it's the davar mesuyim, because it's a specific thing that you're identifying. Okay, so this concludes this sugya, and now we really begin a new sugya. The sugya we're about to begin is a very geshmaka sugya. And it's shared with a sugya in Masechta Megillah. If anything wasn't clear about the previous sugya before we go forward, please now would be the time to ask for clarity.
I just wanted to ask you.
Yeah.
You said that the Rabbana, the Raisa, technically, really, to carry would be, like you said, like a Rosh Hashanah, which would be like a field,
No.
the street
A field not a
or alleyway.
A field is not a Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah is maybe to carry highways at Rosh Hashanah, maybe.
So
actually,
what we are in.
A highway that goes from city to city.
So
but,
our streets are basically the Rabbanan because they're like a Carmelist, right?
Carmelist or a Mavoi, what exactly the Gedder is something like that, yeah, but it's not a Deraisa.
Yeah. So the streets are where we are is just basically the Rabbanan.
Yeah, which is why I have Erevin. That's why you can have an Erev. You can't make an Erev on a Deraisa de Rosh Hashanah. It's only
Exactly.
Yeah, came along and said that you can't carry in a shared space unless you have an Erev. Okay. So now we have this next sugya is a Geshmaka sugya. It's shared by the sugya in the Gemara in Megillah. And it's the sugya of Beis HaKnesses. The sugya of the halachas of building a shul. It's a very Geshmaka sugya, very deep sugya. We'll see how far we get in terms of the depth of different inyanim we'll share. We'll see from Tosafos. We'll open up a window to a number of things. Now, maybe I'm sure the Mefarshim talk about it. I didn't see anywhere they talk about why the sugya of Beis HaKnesses comes up here, but it could be for 2 reasons. Number one, The Gemara is going to talk about the strength of walls and structures. Maybe that's not one reason. Another reason, and this is probably more correct, is that the halacha, the obligation that we have to build a shul in a city comes from the same obligation that we have to build a wall between our properties. It's the laws of neighbors. When you establish a town in halacha, and the Jews can compel each other to donate to build a shul. In the same way, I can compel you to split the cost of building a wall between our properties. We can compel each other to give a tax, essentially, to build a shul. So that's maybe why the Gemara brings this up over here. Says the Gemara like this: Amar Rav Chizda. Rav Chizda says, a new sugya. Loy lister inish beit knishta. A person should not destroy a shul ad the bani beit knishta achrisei, unless he has first built another shul. Fair halacha. So what's the reason behind this halacha that Rav Chizda just said? Ikadamri, there are those that say the reason is mipshum pshiyusa, because of negligence. What's negligence, says Rashi? The Rashi on the left. Mipshum pshiyusa. Gilmin misrami oinus, lest a oinus occur to them, upshoy, and they're going to be negligent, and they won't build another shul. So therefore, don't destroy the shul until you have another one ready to go, until another one's built first. Because something might happen and get distracted and you won't be able to rebuild your shul. Okay? Ikadami, others say, mishum tzluye, because you need a place to daven. And if you have to build another shul before you destroy the original shul. My benayu, what's the difference between these two reasons? What's the difference? What's the difference as to what the reason is for why you're not allowed to destroy a shul until you've rebuilt another one? So Ika benayu, there is a distinction between the two. The Ika be'shnistach, if there is another shul in town. This is the version of the Gemara we have here. When we get to Tosafos, we're going to see there's a different reading of this Gemara. But we'll stick to this one now. If there's another shul in town, so let's follow through with this. If there's another shul in town, and the reason why you're not allowed to destroy one shul before you build another is because you have no place to daven. And if you have another shul in town, we have another place to daven, so you're allowed to destroy the shul even though you don't have another one ready. Because you have another place to daven anyway. But if the question is a question of negligence, then even if there's another place to daven, it's disrespectful to the shul you're looking at now, or you're not allowed to destroy a shul, right? The only reason why you're allowed to destroy a shul is because you're making a bigger one and making a nicer one, right? But if you don't replace it before you destroy it, there might be negligence, and you may not rebuild a new one, and therefore you shouldn't do it. Even if there's another shul in town, it doesn't make a difference. You're still violating the current shul by not building another one first. This is the difference. If we're concerned with people having nowhere to daven, there's another shul in town, no problem. But if we're concerned with negligence, negligence is negligence. You're not going to rebuild a shul. Who cares if there's another shul in town? You're still not going to rebuild this shul. Okay, all right. Yeah, like Rashi says, Mishum Tzluya, the issue of davening is called manabinyan so long as they're still building the new shul. Okay. Now the Gemara goes weiter. Mereimar Marzotra, Mereimar and Marzotra, Satri, Ubani, they destroyed and built Beikaita, a shul of the winter, Bistiva during the summer, or maybe it's the other way around. Kaita is summer, Stiva is winter. I'm not sure which one's which. No, Stiva, I think, is summer. I think. But Kaita Bistiva, so they destroyed and built during the winter. During the summer, they destroyed and rebuilt their winter shul. Ubanu Beistiva Bekaita, and they destroyed and built their winter shul, their summer shul during the winter. This is what they did. So let's see Rashi. Beis HaKnesses Hoyelahem Rashi Bekaita Bestiva. Besitva. Beis HaKnesses Hoyelahem. They had a shul in wintertime. Namuch, that didn't have a high roof. It was very low. The Solim Rechavim, wide walls. Chalonis Ma'atin, and fewer windows, so a more insulated shul. It was lower roof, thicker walls, and less windows. because of the cold. So they want to have a tighter, more compact shul that was more insulated. And during the summer months, they had a different shul, in which air was able to literally control it. And there's a lot of air passing through it. Bigger windows, thinner walls, higher roof. Ancient, what's the word? Insulation or whatever. Air climate control. That's what I'm looking for. Okay, so Merema and Marzutra basically destroyed during the summer months, they would fix up their winter shul, destroy it and rebuild it. And during the winter months, they would do construction on their summer shul. Okay. So this statement is a freestanding statement, and we're going to have to see how it relates to the previous statement. Where do they stand in terms of the previous halacha? The previous halacha was you're not allowed to destroy a shul unless you rebuilt one first. And we gave two reasons. One is because either for negligence or for the problem of it being, what was the other problem? You have nowhere to daven. So which side of the fence would these two people fall on? Would these two chachamim fall on, Marzutra and Meremar? In that question?
The second one.
They would say that the issue is whether they have another shul in town. And because they have another shul in town, no reason not to rebuild, not to destroy, rebuild. Right? That's what you would say, correct? And you would be correct according to the Rosh. So let's look at the Rosh. It's one of the pictures I gave you there. If you have the Gemara, it's Rosh, Simin, Dalet. If you have it in the back of the Gemara, it's the Rosh, Simin, Dalet, Rabbeinu Asher, Simin, Dalet. Or in the WhatsApp group, it's the first or second picture, one of the pictures there. Amar Rav Chizda said, Loi lister inish be knishta, a person shouldn't destroy a shul, elam came bono be knishta, unless you first have another shul in its place. Ika da'ami, some say mishum pshiusa, some say because of negligence, you may not actually rebuild it. Ika da'ami mishum tzluyi, and some say because you need a place to daven in the meantime. My benaya, what's the difference between these two reasons? He's reviewing the Gemara for us. Ika benaya, there is a difference. Ika duchta l'tzluya, this is the version of Tosafos, which says you have another place to daven. The version that we read in the Gemara says the Ika be knishta achrisa. There's another shul in town, and that's why, and that's where the difference is. Whereas here there's another place to daven. Okay, either way, another place to daven. If you have another place to daven, and if the problem is negligence, the negligence is still an issue, even though you have another place to daven. But if the only reason why you have to build the new shul before you destroy the old shul is because you need a place to daven, well, you have another place to daven because there's another shul in town. Okay. Now, Merei Maro Marzutra. Now comes the second halacha which we just learned. Merei Maro Marzutra. Sotri ubanu beikaita besitva ubestiva bekaita. They would destroy their summer shul during the winter, and they would destroy the winter shul during the summer. Inhu, now this, so far they're just recapping the Gemara. Now the Rosh actually comments. Inhu they, Marzutra and Meremar, Savri, they're of the opinion, Mishum Tzluye, because of the issue of you have nowhere to daven. Bahavlu Duchtel Tzluye. And they had a place to daven. Because during summer they were destroying their winter shul. They had their summer shul. And during summer they were destroying during the winter they were destroying their summer shul. They had a shul to daven, their winter shul. As Moshe pointed out. This is the Rosh, and this is L'chora, the more pashtistic way of learning the Gemara. But we're going to see Tosafos learns a little different soon. But before we go to Tosafos, we're going to learn the Gemara Vayter, because learning the Gemara Vayter is going to help us understand Tosafos better. So go back to the Gemara, Gimel and Beis. The Gemara continues. Omer le Ravina le Ravashi. Ravina says to Ravashi, Govu Zuzeh, if they collected money, umachti, and it's sitting there, it's being held in an account somewhere. Let's see Rashi. Govu Zuzeh umachti, l'tzoydek beis hakneses, hachodash. They collected money for the new shul, umunach beyad hagabai, and it's now in the hands of the town treasurer. It's the gabai, is the town treasurer, the person responsible for collecting funds for the community. So he's holding it. Is there concern to be worried about negligence? The money's there. What's the negligence? What's the problem? What could possibly go wrong? So if the issue is that you have nowhere to daven in the meantime, according to that opinion, okay, well, there it's a question of, do you have another shul in town or not? Either you do or you don't. But if it's a question of negligence, which means even if you have another shul in town, you're not allowed to destroy one shul before you build the other. Now, in this case, where you have money put aside, is there an issue of negligence? You have the money there ready to go? Says the Gemara, back to the Gemara, Amar Le, so Rav Ashi responded to Ravina, there's still an issue of negligence, namely, perhaps an issue, a question of pidyon shvuyim will arise. There's going to be a Jew who's stuck in jail, and he requires ransom to get out, and you have no choice. What are you going to do? Keep the money hoarded away for some shul at the expense of a yid sitting in jail? Certainly you're going to give the money away to get the guy out of jail, and no, now the negligence happened, you have no new shul. And therefore, even if you have money put away, you still cannot destroy the old shul before you rebuild a new one. So, perhaps an issue of pidyon shvuyim will arise. And they're going to give the guy the money to redeem him. Okay. Says the Gemara, Shrigi Livni. Now, Ravina further asked Rav Ashi, Shrigi Livni, Bahadri Hudri, Umachti Kishuri. What does this mean? Let's look at Rashi. Shrigi Livni, Musidorim Alavenim. The bricks, the Livni, are ready. Zal Gevzeh, they're piled next to each other. They're ready to be built. Not just you have the money, you actually bought the materials. You have them. You have the bricks stacked up there. Hadri hudri, the runners, the beams of the roof are waiting, and the other thing is the boards. So you have all the material ready. You have the bricks, you have the boards, you have the beams. Everything's ready to go. You just didn't put it together. What's the halacha then? Continues asking Ravina of Rav Ashi. Maybe at this point, there's no issue of negligence because you have the material already. Not only you have the money, you have material. Amar Le, so Rav Ashi responded, Zin the misrabel pidyon shvuyim. Perhaps there's going to be an issue of pidyon shvuyim, someone who needs ransom. And Mizavni, you're going to sell this material, and you're going to actually use the money to redeem the ransom. You're going to sell the material. So then Rav Ashi responds to Ravina, or Ravina responds to Rav Ashi, I'm sorry, if so, if we're concerned that the community is willing to sell materials to pay the ransom, so then even if you have a built shul, the guy's going to sell the shul. He'll sell the shul. If you're willing to sell materials, sell the shul also. Meaning, how far are you going to go with this? The first case where the guy had cash, okay, cash is cash. So you can say, I'm going to give the cash for ransom, and we'll raise funds later for the shul. But you have materials, and now you're claiming that the guy's willing to sell materials to pay for ransom, so then go all the way. He'll sell the shul to pay for ransom. See how far the Gemara seems obviously zero. But there's a limit, as we're going to see.
It's pidyon shvuyim today. Pidyon shvuyim, you mean like it's bail, right?
Bail, yeah, pay ransom. It's not, bail is like a modern term. It's ransom.
Okay. Ransom.
Which back in the old day didn't necessarily mean that the guy was guilty of anything. In most cases, it meant he wasn't. It could be the landowner decided to hike up the price of rent and put you into a dungeon because of it. That's in later periods, probably not in times of the Gemara. But as far back as whatever, ransom was an issue. Pirates and what do they call the people in the deserts? With hijack people, hijack caravans. What were they called?
Capture.
Sorry?
Captures, like
not an uncommon occurrence. Meaning the person you're paying for ransom doesn't mean he's a criminal. Likelihood not.
No, like what do you call it? Not hijack, like abduction.
Yeah, there's a word for it. There's pirates are on the sea and there's something else in the deserts. I don't know what it is. Anyway, so says Rashi, let's see Rashi, Kibonu Nami Beknishta, Chadata, even if they actually rebuilt a whole new one, maybe they still shouldn't destroy the old one. The Dilma Misab Pidyon Shvuyim, because maybe they're going to have Pidyon Shvuyim, and they're going to sell the new shul. If we're concerned with people selling things for shul, for ransom, you can never rebuild a new shul because you can never destroy an old shul, even after you build a new one, because there's always a concern you're going to sell the property to pay ransom. Okay. Omar Lei, Rav Ashi responded to Ravina, the Yarta the Inish loy mezavni. A person doesn't sell his own house. He'll sell everything, but he's not going to sell his own house. The Yarta, like Dira, the Inish, of a person loy mezavni, he won't sell. Okay? And therefore, he's not going to sell his own house. He's certainly not going to sell his shul. Says the Gemara right there. And this isn't said. What isn't said? It says Rashi, this halacha, that you're not allowed to destroy an old shul before you've rebuilt a new one, is only said, Ella, only in a case, where you find no structural, tira literally means cracks. Like Rashi says, bikua, cracks, that informs you that the shul is about to fall. So if the structure is in, what's the word? Structural integrity. So if the structural integrity is sound, then that's when this halacha applies, that you cannot destroy the old one before you build a new one. But if you see that the structural integrity is in question and the building might fall, so it's a question of public safety, then satra, you destroy the shul, ubani, and you build a new one, even if you don't have the new one ready. You got to destroy that old shul, it's too dangerous. And the Gemara says that this taka happened. This happened with Rav Ashi. He saw that the building of the shul that he davened in, at the Masa Machasya, in a place called Masa Machasya, he saw that the shul there had cracks and it was a danger. Satre, he got it destroyed immediately. Va'ayel lepuraya lahasam, and he brought up his bed. Ayel means he brought up, puraya, his bed, lahasam, to there. He parked his bed right there by the shul, by the destroyed shul. V'loy afke, and he wouldn't remove his bed. Adamatkin leishvichi, so the building was so far well done that even the gutters, shvichi means to pour, the gutters from which the rain runs out, he stayed there until it was rebuilt all the way to the point that the gutters were put in place. Why did he do that? Why did he put his bed there? So it says Rashi, he put his bed there. So he shouldn't have negligence, and we were scared of negligence, you're not going to rebuild it. So in order for him not to give up on building the new thing, he put his bed there. He made his permanent residence on that spot, outdoors. And that way, the heat and the rain obviously were very disturbing. And therefore, that would obviously remind him, you got to get this job done. And that way, he did get it done. But the point here, you can see the halacha is that if there's a danger, you don't wait till you build a new one. Destroy it because it's a danger. Rashi to translate the word shvichi, marzivin. Marziv is like a pipe. Okay. Now the Gemara says like this. And now we're going to, we still have time, hopefully we'll do, maybe we have to do it, we'll do one Tosafos at least. Okay. Bava ben Buta, the Gemara asks, Bava ben Buta. Bava ben Buta is a fascinating character the Gemara is going to introduce us to shortly. Is the times of the Beis Mikdash, second Beis Mikdash. So Bava ben Buta, one of the early Tanaim, how did he give Hordus the advice, the mystery of the Beis Mikdash, to destroy the Beis Mikdash? We're going to learn soon, as Rashi tells us. The Gemara is going to say later, Bishmaitin, in our Gemara. Actually, it's a very interesting Rashi, the last Rashi on the page here. How did Bava ben Buta give advice to Hordus? Hordus, of course, is a king who inherited, who stole the sovereignty from the Hashmonaim. We're going to come on, and the Gemara is going to tell us the story later. The Gemara is going to tell us the story of Hordus and the story of Bava ben Buta right after this halacha. Beautiful, fascinating story. The Kamam Bishmaitim later in our Gemara. And then here, these words are very interesting in Rashi. The story is described in the book of Josephus, son of Gurion. Why is it such a fascinating Rashi? Because Josephus, as a historian, is a very questionable figure. Josephus, not in English or in Hebrew, Josephine, is a guy who was a Roman, a Jewish general. And early on, when the Romans invaded Eretz Yisrael, before they made it to Yerushalayim, very early on, he lost the battle to the Romans, and he switched sides. He became an asset to the Romans. And because he was familiar with Jewish culture, Jewish way of living, he was also familiar with the land of Eretz Yisrael, the physical terrain. So he was able to guide the Romans into easy conquest all the way to Yerushalayim. So he's a traitor to the Jewish people, really. And then later, that's what he is, he's a traitor, it seems like. And then later he became this historian. He's a good writer, and he became a historian for the Romans. And he wrote not just a history of the wars that led to the destruction of the Beis Mikdash, but he also wrote history of the Jews. The story of Hanukkah is in there, and the story of, I think even earlier than Hanukkah. I'm pretty sure he starts way earlier, and then the story all the way to his time, which is the destruction of the Beis Mikdash. And the destruction of the Beis Mikdash is a century after Hordes, roughly maybe less than a century, certainly decades after Hordes. So he's writing history that happened a little while before him. Anyway, Josephus is a very central figure in knowing the history of that period. And as I mentioned, he's a questionable figure because he traded sides. He went from the Jewish side to the Roman side. And now here Rashi seems to be giving, I don't know if a stamp of approval that every word he says is correct, but certainly validating it as a legit source. But he says,
I know.
Go look up Josephus to find the story.
I know historically there was a reworked version in Yiddish that was very popular. Yeah? I don't know if maybe that's what he's referring to.
Now, Yiddish, I don't know if Yiddish is around in times of Rashi. Maybe some early version of Yiddish. But I don't know if Yiddish was around in times of Rashi. But Yosefin is available in Hebrew. He refers to him as Yosefin, not Josephus. So probably available in Hebrew for a long time. Anyway, it's just a fascinating little tidbit of information. Okay, so let's see what's the mice with Bab ben Buta. Says the Gemara. As we're going to learn in the story after this halacha. We'll get to the story next week in Bet Hashem. How did Bab ben Buta give advice to Hordos to destroy the Beis Mikdash? He destroyed it and rebuilt it. Bab ben Buta gave Hordos the advice to rebuild the Beis Mikdash, to refurbish it, I should say. And the kaisel that we have today is built by Hordos because of the advice of Bab ben Buta, as we're going to learn soon. So how did he do that? We just learned this. You cannot destroy a shul until you have a new shul. And so how did you destroy the old Beis Mikdash? He didn't have another one. So how could you tell him? How could you make him destroy it and rebuild it? And so the Gemara two answers. Either you can say the Beis Mikdash was in such disrepair that Baba ben Buta identified structural issues that's a question of it being dangerous. Either that's reason number one, he was able to destroy it in order to rebuild it. Another answer is Malchus Shiny. Sovereignty is different. When a king says he's going to do it, he's not going to take his word back. He says he's going to build it, he's going to build it. There's no issue of negligence. And therefore, Baba ben Buta was allowed to tell Hordos to do it because Hordos is a king. The Amar Shmuel, as Shmuel famously said, and this is people who learn Siddur, you should know this quote from Siddur. Amar Malchusa, the king says, Akarne Torah, let's uproot the mountain. Akar Torah, the mountain is uprooted. The king says uproot the mountain's uprooted, period. And the king won't go back on his word. I'm sure you've heard this quote before. Okay, so this is the Gemara with respect to the shul, and the Gemara now is going to get, next week we're going to get into the story with Hordos and Bab ben Buta. But if you're okay with it, I want to do at least one Tosafos here. So let's see the Tosafos. Haggah, a gloss. Top right. I don't know what the word gloss, why it says Haggah here, but Rabbi Pekarsky in his Tosafos in English says that it indicates, I'm not sure if he's suggesting this or if he saw this somewhere, but he said that it indicates that it was added later, as opposed to the original Tosafos. Okay, but anyway, the gloss reads as follows: Bei kaito bei stiva, summer shul and a winter shul, which we learned in the Gemara, Meremar and Marzutra would destroy during the winter and during the summer. Right? They would destroy the winter shul during the summer and the summer shul during the winter. So says Tosafos, this is equal to a shul that has structural issues. Vishardi and is permissible. What does he mean that there's structural issues with the shul? Why does he mean this? So let's go to the Marsha. It's the other picture I sent you in the WhatsApp. And if you have Gemara, it's printed in the back. After the Rosh comes the Marsha. The Marsha says like this. Hasolka daitach. You're looking at the picture. You see in the bottom right. Hasten Magdalad. Hasolka daitach lefi haga. The assumption, according to this gloss, is zu makem echad haya. This was one shul. Rashi, as we learned it, said that there were two shoals, one in the winter, one in the summer. And during the summer, they would destroy and rebuild the winter one. And during the winter, they would destroy and rebuild the summer one, which was why Moshe correctly pointed out, as we saw from the Rosh, that Merei Marzutra reject the idea of negligence. And they say the issue with destroying a shoal before building one is an issue of having another shoal. And because they have another shoal, because they have two shoals, it's no problem. But Tosafos says, Echad Hoya, it's one shoal. To be Spiva Hischilu Lister Oisai, Velasaisa Bekaita. Lakaita. That in the summer, I guess at the end of the summer, they would begin to destroy it, so that it would become a winter home and they would winterize it. Lakaita or Bekaita. And at the end of the winter, they would destroy it. To make it a summer residence. Let's do it for the summer. And therefore, it's permissible because it's like a structural issue, because it's too cold or too hot. The permissibility, according to Tosafos, of destroying this winter shoal and making it ready for summer, and destroying the summer shoal in order to make it ready for winter, is because it's unsafe to be in a winter home during the summer, and it's unsafe to be in a summer home during the winter. And that's why you're allowed to destroy it and build it, but it's one building. So they must have had very quick turnaround. And every year, at the beginning of summer, they would do some quick job to summarize this shoal. And at the end of summer, they would quickly do a quick job and winterize it. And it's permissible, even though they're not building a new one before, because it's not safe. Okay. Now let me ask you, in this version, is Merei Marzutra rejecting the idea of negligence being an issue? Not at all. They're not concerned with, they are concerned with negligence, and yet they're still making it permissible because it's an issue of safety. In the same way, the Gemoro says later that an issue of public safety overrides even an issue of negligence. If it's an issue of public safety, destroy the shoal. Now, according to Tosafos, the issue of rebuilding it every summer and winter is an issue of safety. It's unsafe to be davening in a summer shul during the winter. It's unsafe to be davening in the winter shul during the summer. So in the Rosh, where it's two different buildings, one for winter, one for summer, then they're rejecting the issue of negligence. They're only concerned with the issue of another shul, which is why it's permissible because you have two shuls. But in Tosafos, where it's one shul, this is what the Marshal goes on to point out. But in Tosafos, where it's one shul, and every year before winter they would winterize it, and before the summer they would summarize it, destroying and rebuilding. So they too could be concerned with negligence, and yet they're still permissible because it's tiyua, because it's like a structural issue, because it's a safety issue. Yeah? This is what Tosafos says. Now the in shtei batik nisiyas hayu, the beis mekaymes shall kaita the shall sitva. If you want to insist that it's two different locations, one here, one there, one for summer, one for winter, I still will not let you destroy it and rebuild it, because negligence is an issue. And just because you have another shul, it doesn't allow you to destroy the other one. Right? The Rosh said that the reason why they're allowed to destroy one shul is because they have another shul, and they rejected the issue of negligence. Tosafos is maintaining that they do care about the issue of negligence. And because they still consider about the issue of negligence, even if they have another shul, you still can't destroy the old one. So why are you allowed to destroy the old one? It says Tosafos, Kagoin, for example, the Chazi Beit Shiur. Even this is where there's some sort of structural issue. Maybe it's not collapsing, but there's got to be some problem there, which is why they're allowed to destroy the winter shul during the summer months and destroy the summer shul during the winter months, because there is some issue. Stam, you wouldn't be able to do that. And the fact that you have another shul is not enough because it's an issue of negligence. I hope this is clear. If not, please interrupt me. Moreover, if you're going to insist that the taka two shuls, one for summer, one for winter, because you have another shul, there's no concern with the issue of lacking to build the other shul, because you have another shul there. But I would just finish saying that Tosafos is concerned with negligence. So who cares if another shul? That's what Tosafos is about to ask. But the Gemara just said earlier that when you have another place to daven, then there's still an issue of negligence. That was the Gemara's answer. Now, what's the difference between the two opinions? whether you say the problem is negligence or whether you say the problem is whether you say the problem is you have nowhere to daven. The difference is when you have another place to daven. If you have another place to daven, then the issue of negligence is still there, whereas the issue of davening in another place isn't there. Now, if Tosafos is insisting that we're still concerned with negligence here, then why is Tosafos saying that you're allowed to destroy the summer shul during the winter just because of another shul? L'chorah, there's still the issue of negligence. You're not going to rebuild your shul. Yeah? Hainu, this is to say, she'ein beis hakneses. So this gets to the specific wording of the Gemara. When the Gemara said Ika B'nai, let's build this like this. The Gemara gave two reasons for why you have to rebuild a new shul before you destroy the old one. Reason number one is negligence. Reason number two is because you have nowhere to daven. Right? And the Gemara asked, what's the difference between two reasons? Answer, we have another shul in town. That was the Gemara's language. The Ika Be'knishta Achrisa. Tosafos' version of the Gemara is different, and we saw in the Rush also. Not the Ika Be'knishta Achrisa, but the Ika Duchta Litzluya. There's a place to daven. You have another place to daven. But says Tosafos, you have another place to daven, but it's not a shul. You have someone's private residence to daven in. You have an outdoor courtyard, but it's not a shul. And when there's an issue of no other shul, but you have a place to daven, then we are concerned with your negligence. But if you have an actual other shul, then we're not concerned with negligence. Which means, Tosafos says, even according to Tosafos, which says that Merei, Mara, and Marzot are maintaining the issue of negligence. And because they're maintaining the issue of negligence, Tosafos says, you can't stamazoi, destroy a shul, even though you have another shul. And therefore, the winter-summer shul must be one building. And it's so bad because it's an issue of safety. Or if it's two shuls, there's some sort of structural issue. Because you can't destroy a shul, even if you have another one, because it's an issue of negligence. Says Tosafos now, I'm limiting the scope of the issue of negligence. The issue of negligence only applies when you have no other shul in town. If you have another shul in town, then there's no issue of negligence. And I don't care for your negligence. If there's no other shul in town, but there is another place to daven, then negligence is an issue, whereas the concern that you have nowhere to daven until you build a new shul is not an issue because you have a place to daven, even if it's not a shul. Somewhat clear? If it's not, again, please interrupt me. The oid, moreover, says Tosafos.
So then negligence is, it's always an issue, negligence, unless it's a danger.
So if it's a danger, for sure negligence is discounted. That the Gemara said clearly from Ravashi's story, where he took the shul down and he parked his bed there. So negligence, safety always overrides. So if it's one shul, that's what they're able to do because it's an issue of safety. Now Tosafos is adding a new thing, that when you have another shul in town, let's say you want to insist that the winter and summer shuls are two different shuls, and still they destroyed one during the other, either this issue of negligence. Said Tosafos, the issue of negligence only applies when you have another physical shul. Now, if negligence only applies when you have another if negligence only applies when there's no other shul in town, then what's the difference between two reasons? What's the difference? Right, there's two reasons why you shouldn't destroy a shul before you build a new one. Either because of negligence, Shiur, or because you have nowhere else to daven. If Shiur only applies when you have no other shul, then what's the difference between the two reasons? So Tosafos explains that the Gemara wasn't saying you have another shul in town. The Gemara was saying you have a place, you have a place to daven. It's not a shul, it's someone's backyard. But you have a place to daven until the new shul is built? Okay, so according to the person that's worried about nowhere to daven, no issue, because you have the guy's backyard. But according to the issue of negligence, we're still concerned about negligence. But if you have an actual full shul, not some guy's backyard, you have a full other shul in town, then even the people who say there's an issue of negligence, they're still okay with you destroying it because you have another shul. So the issue of negligence, according to Tosafos, is only when there's no other shul. There's no other shul, but you have some guy's backyard to daven in. So if you have some guy's backyard to daven in, then we're concerned with negligence, but we're not concerned they have nowhere to daven until the place is rebuilt because you have the guy's backyard. And that would be the difference between the two opinions in this new version of Tosafos that is limiting the scope of what negligence is. I hope that's more clear. Okay, now finally, Tosafos gives two more answers. Why they were allowed to destroy one shoal while they're doubting the other shoal, even though there's an issue of negligence. Additionally, because of the cold and the heat, we're not concerned that they're going to be negligent. Meaning to say, let's say they're in two different shoals. They're in this, it's summer months now. They destroyed their winter shoal. We're not concerned that they're going to neglect rebuilding their winter shoal. Why? Because they know winter is coming and they don't want to suffer. So they aren't going to neglect building their winter shoal. And the same thing in the reverse. During the winter, when they destroy their summer shoal, we're not concerned that they're going to neglect rebuilding their summer shoal because they're going to suffer in the summer if they don't have the summer shoal. So this is another reason why we're not concerned with negligence in the case of winter-summer.
That doesn't fix the problem of the which the Gemara said of the what do you call it? Pidyon Shuim.
Yeah, well, that's independent. Explain what you mean.
They said you don't have to worry about it in this case because they don't want to be uncomfortable. But Pidyon Shuim is gonna trump that. Obviously, if it trumps all those everything else.
Kasha. So,
but you said Pidyon Shuim is more important.
Yeah, but the question, but then no, but if it's more important, then you shouldn't be allowed to destroy the shoal because next year comes around, the money you put aside for that shoal is gone because of Pidyon Shuim. That's what Aaron's are asking. If you destroy the winter shoal during the summer, and Tosafos is saying, we're not worried about your negligence because you're going to rebuild it because you don't want to suffer in the winter. So you have all this cash ready to rebuild the summer, your winter shoal, and now a Pidyon Shuim comes up. Aaron's arguing you give all the money to Pidyon Shuim. Now, if that's the case, we shouldn't allow you to destroy the winter shoal because you may not rebuild it, even though it's going to make you just uncomfortable. Right? Good kasha. I don't know. We have to think exactly what the gather is. Because, like the Gemoro said later, that a person doesn't sell his own house for Pidyon Shuim. So does this count as a gather of his own house? Or maybe it's cash. It's not his own house. It's cash. And it's a question of later discomfort. I would argue they would give the money for Pidyon Shuim. By the time winter comes, we'll raise the funds again. You know. Good kasha. I know the answer. Okay.
Oh, is this what Tosafos is saying now? The next line.
No, actually, the next line is going to make your question even stronger. It's another answer Tosafos gives, which is when you have so much time, we're not concerned that something radical is going to happen and destroy your.
Oh yeah, so then it's like you're going to get even more Pidyon Shuim.
Either that, or you have more time to raise funds.
Right.
Either way, so either makes your question stronger in that now you have
or
time,
it's the answer. Yeah.
Or you have more time and now you can raise more funds. But when I looked at Tosafos, I did not think of the Pidyon Shuim in relation to this Tosafos. Okay. So one more small Tosafos. Actually, this Tosafos will be for next week because it's the sugya of the halacha about the knesiyas. We'll get there. We'll do that next week in Mitzvah. Okay. Any questions, comments before we close up?
Shkoyach, good Shabbos.
Yeah, good Nacht and good Shabbos, everybody.
Thank you.
Shkoyach, thank you.
Shabbos.
Shabbos.